The baby boy brought back to life. I was told of this incredible event by Miss Benedetta Mangione, a very old lady, the same age as Aunt Rosaria, who was also part of the group of girls who went to Luisa to learn to make lace. This is her tale. One morning, in about 1920-21, while I was at Luisa's house, after taking part in Holy Mass celebrated by her confessor, Gennaro di Gennaro, a deeply distressed young woman burst into the room of the servant of God with cries of despair and placed her dead baby on Luisa's lap, while she knelt at her bedside, weeping desperate tears. Everyone was amazed, and Rosaria tried to get the woman to her feet. From her way of speaking, I realized that she was one of her relatives. Luisa was not upset by the scene and began to caress the child that lay on her knees. She said to the mother, "What are you thinking of, Serafina? Take Luigi and give him some milk. He is hungry." And thereupon she put him in her arms. Aunt Rosaria then asked her to leave the room and go home. The young woman wasted no time in obeying. Miss Bangione, like all those in the room, had the feeling that the infant had been resuscitated. However, knowing that Luisa did not want certain things to be broadcast, they said nothing to anyone about what had happened. Rosaria closed the curtains round Luisa's bed and showed everyone out of the room, telling them that Luisa had to give thanks for the communion she had just received. Nor did her confessors say a word, but left immediately, together with the baby boy's mother. A few days after this episode, Aunt Rosaria said to Angelina, "That couple," referring to her brother and sister-in-law, "should stop going to the theater, or they will both end up in prison." This is the sequence of events that led to the presumed death of the new baby. The young couple, Francesco Bucci and Serafina Garofalo, had a passion for the theater, to which they went regularly. A son was born to them, whom they called Luigi. One evening, at the theater in Corato, a Verdi opera was being performed. I think it was Rigoletto. The temptation was so strong that the two of them settled their baby in his cradle and went to the theater. On their return, it was almost dawn, they found that the baby, who had turned over in the cradle, had suffocated. Panicking, the father Francesco fled from Corato, while the mother, Serafina, overcome with despair, wrapped the baby in a shawl and carried him to Luisa. In the family, this episode was never mentioned. Only once did my mother, Serafina Garofalo, tell the story of a baby boy restored to life, but, perhaps feeling guilty, she did not say who was involved. I can testify that my mother was very close to her firstborn son, and had such a deep veneration for Luisa the saint that she often talked about her. My brother, Luigi, had the same veneration for Luisa. Indeed, after the condemnation of 1938, Aunt Rosaria came to our house wanting to burn all the objects that belonged to Luisa. But my brother, who was 18 years old and on the point of leaving for military service, opposed this with all his might. And when he was told that those who disobey the church go to hell, he answered, "I will go to hell, but her things will not be burned." And as a precaution, he put all the objects belonging to Luisa into a small box and took it away with him. Today, they are in the care of my sister-in-law, Rita Tarantino, and her children, who guard them jealously. Isa Bucci and Luisa Piccarreta. My sisters, Luisa, Maria, and Gemma, and my brothers, Agostino, Luigi, and also the youngest member of the family, Giuseppe, known as Peppino, would go frequently to Luisa's house. They all gave written testimonies on Luisa Piccarreta, but, through a certain sense of modesty, limited themselves to the essentials. Indeed, I know of other events which were recounted in the family. My sister Luisa, the oldest, was the one who visited the servant of God most often, not as an apprentice lacemaker, but as Aunt Rosaria's niece. On various occasions, she helped Angelina and Aunt Rosaria with the domestic chores, and had a relationship of great familiarity with Luisa. Indeed, it was she who nursed Luisa at night during her last illness. When the doctor had ascertained that Luisa was dead, it was she who took the initiative of undressing her, redressing her, and trying to lay her out on the bed. This is what she said when she came home. Luisa's death created an atmosphere of veneration mingled with fear. No one dared touch her. Aunt Rosaria and Angelina had been taken out of Luisa's room crying. I attempted to lay her out on the bed, but the task was beyond me. Either her legs would bend, or her mouth would open, as if she wanted to say, "Let me be." Then I suggested to those present, including her niece, Giuseppina, that we change her clothes immediately before the stiffness set in. This is what we tried to do. Then we took her into the next room, where a sort of bier had been prepared, all in white. What astonished me most was that in carrying Luisa, I had the impression that she was as light as a feather. Hence I understood how it was that very often, when Aunt Rosaria was making her bed, she would carry her with extreme ease to her wheelchair. A sort of bib was placed on Luisa's breast, with the letters Fiat and the cross of the Dominican tertiaries. The nightdress that was taken off Luisa was folded by my sister and given to Aunt Rosaria, who said to her, "Take it home." This nightdress is now in the possession of my sister Gemma. The cross of the Dominican tertiaries that Luisa was wearing on her deathbed, removed from her body on the day of her burial, was constantly worn by Aunt Rosaria. Today it is in my possession and jealously guarded. Gemma Bucci and Luisa Piccarreta. As children, we all visited Luisa's house, especially my sisters, who would also go there to learn the rudiments of lace-making. My sister Gemma was very close to me in age and willingly went to Luisa Piccarreta's house with Aunt Rosaria almost every day. Gemma was a little wisp of a girl. Aunt Rosaria and Luisa were very fond of her. In fact, Gemma's name had been given to her by Luisa herself. She suggested to my parents that they call me Giuseppe and have my sister's name changed from Giuseppina to Gemma. This was done. I was given the name of Jesus' earthly father, and my sister, from the age of 2, was always called by the name of Gemma, although it proved impossible to change her names at the records office because of the bureaucratic complications involved. Gemma would come and go very confidently from Luisa's room. Luisa liked her vivacity and gave her the task of picking up the pins that fell on the floor. Once, little Gemma hid under Luisa's bed, perhaps to give Aunt Rosaria a surprise, and unwittingly witnessed a mystical phenomenon. Luisa had a bedside table on which stood a glass bell containing a figurine of the child Jesus. At a certain point, my sister was aware of something unusual. A great silence fell. Not even the chatter of the girls working in the next room could be heard. Then Gemma came out from under the bed and saw the child who had come to life, whom Luisa had taken in her arms and was covering with kisses. Gemma does not remember how long she kept still, contemplating this scene. She only remembers that, at a certain point, everything returned to normal. Aunt Rosaria entered the little room as usual, and Luisa was working at her lace-making, as was her custom. My sister never told me of this episode in her childhood. She jealously stored up the event in her heart. I only came to know of it after the testimony, now in the Acts, which she gave at the diocesan cause for her canonization. I believe that Luisa's assistance to my sister Gemma has been continuous. In this regard, I witnessed a special grace. At the birth of her second son, because of the incompetence of the doctor and his assistants, my sister came close to death. In fact, during the birth, her uterus ruptured, causing a terrible hemorrhage. The doctor left the operating theater and said these chilling words to her relatives. "We have saved the child, but nothing more can be done for the mother." While the others were bursting into tears, I remembered Luisa's nightdress. I hastened to Corato and went to my parents' home. I awoke Aunt Rosaria in the middle of the night and told her what had happened. I then asked her for the nightgown, which, weeping, she immediately took from the chest. We went back to the hospital of Bisceglie together. We suggested to a nurse that the nightgown be placed under Gemma's head, and this was immediately done. The doctor in charge had already left. Immediately afterwards, we saw his assistant, who said, "If you give me permission, I will operate on her immediately." Permission was given, although Gemma's husband had said, "If she is unconscious, operate. Otherwise it is pointless making her suffer any more." A friend of my brother-in-law, a nurse at the psychiatric hospital of Bisceglie, arrived and donated the 6 liters of blood necessary for the transfusion. The operation was successful and Gemma recovered. Aunt Rosaria was convinced that Luisa had intervened. This is Gemma's account. While the doctor was operating on me, I saw Luisa at the foot of my bed with the baby in her arms. She said, "He is destined for heaven. You, instead, will live a long life." And I was aware, I don't know how, that my head was resting upon Luisa's nightdress. The next day, the baby sickened mysteriously with acute bronchitis. I baptized him, and immediately afterwards, the newborn child died. This episode was considered a true and proper miracle by the whole family. Unfortunately, there was no thought at that time of the cause of canonization, so no one had the idea of gathering the testimonies of the surgeon and the nurses, who were also convinced that my sister recovered only by a miracle, since hers was a unique and inexplicable clinical case. End of chapter 7.